Hi everyone, and welcome to this session. My name is Olivier Weforum from the World Economic Forum. I will be moderating this session, a discussion that will focus on the future readiness of SMEs and mid-sized companies report that has been published today by the World Economic Forum in collaboration with the National University of Singapore. This report focuses on the big opportunity behind small businesses. The big picture here is that we have 90% of the economy that is represented by small SMEs and mid-sized businesses. These businesses are driving 70% of employment at the global level, and some estimates are even putting those smaller businesses as driving close to 70% of global GDP. However, when we start looking closer to this group and talking to them, we realize that more than half of them are actually fighting for survival. So the situation in which we are is that a majority of the economy, 9 out of 10 businesses out there, are fighting for survival. So that's the size of the challenge that we're facing when we look at this group of companies. We are also saying that there is a big opportunity behind it, because the question here is what happens if we manage to shift those businesses from a focus on fighting for survival, to building future readiness. What would happen if these businesses were thriving, were driving positive change across the economies in which they operate at the local, regional, and national level? This is the question that we will unpack in the next 30 minutes. And to do this, I'm very happy to be joined today by our panelists here. So we have here with us Rashima Raja, lecturer at the National University of Singapore. Rashima has been the co-author of this report and has been working with the forum on this last year as well as this year. So welcome, Rashima, and thank you for joining. We have Soumyad Bouchardoui, who is Associate Professor for Sustainable Management and Digital Analytics from TBS Education from France. Soum has been extensively publishing and researching the intersection between sustainability and SMEs. You have been also contributing to the report that focuses on this topic in the report this year. And last but not least, Christian Moore, who is Chief Customer Officer at Unternehmertum, one of the leading business creator in Europe. And in your role there, Christian, you primarily focus on mid-sized companies and family business, mostly accompanying them on their innovation journey. So thank you all again for being here with us. Rashima, I'd like to start with you as a co-author of this report. Could you share with us some of the highlights from this year's edition?
Right. All right. Thank you, Olivier, for having me. It has been wonderful collaborating with the forum for 2 years in a row now. So I'll just go straight into the highlights. Well, the key challenges that we discovered from this year's report is actually largely similar to the challenges faced by top executives of SMEs and mid-sized companies last year. So I would just mention two. Number one is funding, of course, access to funding, capital, focus on survival, extreme focus on survival is top challenge. And the second challenge is talent. When it comes to talent acquisition and talent retention, and with the recent great resignation trend, it hasn't made things any easier for SMEs. So these are key highlights of the report. And since the COVID-19 pandemic, there has been many global events that severely impact and disproportionately impact SMEs and mid-sized companies. So our report also highlights some ways, some practical recommendations that can hopefully help SMEs and mid-sized companies to build more future readiness. And I think one thing that I would like to highlight here is that the sustainability trend tends to be overlooked by most of the executives that we interviewed. So according to our survey, only 7% of top executives of SMEs and mid-sized companies recognized that sustainability is a top challenge. And we'll talk more about this, I believe, in the session in the next 30 minutes. But essentially, these were the key highlights. Despite the importance of sustainability coming off of COP27, this being important in the views of stakeholders like governments and consumers, the fact that only 7% of the top executives think about it, we'd like to change that. Hopefully we do that in this report.
Thank you. And Rashima, I'd like to stay with you for a few more minutes. Sure. This is the second year we're doing this work. Could you share with us how does what we found this year compare with last year? Mm-hmm. Last year we're just coming out of COVID for most of those companies. Mm-hmm. How is the picture a year later? Okay. And also, what's the specific focus this year of the report compared to what was done last year?
Right. So last year was kind of a starting point. We were really looking at it from an academic literature perspective, and we had a foundation with a research model that we wanted to test. Most of our hypotheses were supported. We had interesting findings from last year, namely the importance of networks and mobilizing people in times of crisis, especially for smaller companies. We also found last year that as companies grow and they become medium-sized or mid-sized, they look more inward towards their business orientation or business model as opposed to looking outward toward their networks, and they relied less on their networks, right? So those were things that we thought were interesting from last year. This year, we wanted to move above and beyond the theory. We wanted to, as I mentioned earlier, provide practical recommendations, the so what of the report. And we tested, for instance, this time, what we call a meta driver, the power of the people. We looked empirically how authentic leadership, leading with a vision and leading with values, aligning to the values of the employees, how that, as well as talent fit, how the power of the people encourage concerted efforts towards future readiness, including things like digital transformation and sustainability, which we will talk about later. So, and if I could just have another half a minute, we also, this year, one thing that was different was we allowed SMEs and mid-sized companies to fill out a self-assessment tool, and we benchmarked them against their peers so that they can actually see where the gaps are between themselves and their competitors, and hopefully this report would provide some inspiration on how they can bridge those gaps.
Great, thank you, Rashma, for the overview. I'll pick up on two things you said and turn now to Sum. So one of the most overlooked aspects is around sustainability, and maybe you'll help us kind of narrow this down a little bit. And another one, we heard about challenges and gaps. So Sum, you've been focusing on that topic of sustainability, specifically in the context of SMEs and mid-sized companies. Can you tell us a little bit, in that context, how does success look like for SMEs? For the one that manage actually that pivot, that transformation toward more sustainable business models and other. Can you share with us, how does that look like?
Yeah. Olivier, thank you for the question. So first of all, sustainability is a broad term. It can be lean, it can be green, it can be well-being, it can be economic. So it has a lot of terms embedded in it. So the example I'm going to give is the example of an Indian SME, Oracle, that works with chemicals in the plastic and rubber industry. So what they did was they used a circular economy strategy where the chemical waste was reused as an input to different production processes. They also used effluent treatment plants to remove toxic and non-toxic waste from water so that it can be reused and recycled properly. So what we see here is that they are actually reducing their waste, improving their material efficiency, and at the same time saving energy and increasing their productivity. So if we talk about hard numbers, they improved their productivity in 2021, it was around 9.82% to in 2021-22 to around 29.5 to 30%. So that's a huge increment, and it was more than what they had estimated. So they did all these things, and their strategy was to reduce the waste and to reduce the energy usage and improve their efficiency. And they also used digital tools in order to store all this data so that they can do what they call preventive maintenance of the machines, so that the uptime of the machines will be high, there are less energy usage from the machine, and at the same time, efficiency. It's all about being efficient.
Great, thank you for that example of how success could look like, and especially on the type of impact that you can have when you do that successfully. So we've heard it's not always rosy, and that journey is not an easy one. So what were some of the key challenges that you might want to highlight to our audience in that process that this company went through?
So of all the challenges, I would pick out two challenges. The first challenge was actually to change the mindset of the people in the organization. People drive processes, and then processes will lead to productivity. So to have those digital skills and green skills within the organization, that will help them to drive these processes and in a productive way so that the employees are satisfied and the employees understand what is going on. You cannot just have a strategy without involving the employees. So that was one of the most critical things, because it's also an example from a developing economy. So the culture is quite different, an organization culture. The second, the difficult part for them is to actually keep up with the trends. Now, keep up with the trends of sustainability awareness, technology turbulence. So where do we start? And what do we do first? So shall we do the green first, or shall we do the digital first? Shall we do the lean first, or something along those lines? So it was always problematic to where the starting point is. And SMEs all over the world have this problem, and these were the complications. And there were some other issues which were related to what we call is the local sourcing of products, that is Scope 3 emissions, that they were not able to get their suppliers from nearby, and which is a challenge, because if you are going for green suppliers, maybe they are far away from you. So trade-off. And those were the complications in their green journey, but which is still evolving. So they have made a good start, and it's still evolving, and there will be more complications, but with solutions.
Great. And I think just building on what you said on where you are and where you start, there's an interesting table in the report where you have that level of maturity, where you can try to find where you are in that journey, and then look at what would be the most immediate next step and some of the benefits you could get from this. Maybe last, if you could wrap up for us, that examples, and what are some of the key learnings you would extract from this that you could share with the audience here?
The first key learning is that in order to use data, you don't need to have a lot of data, but you need to do a business lifecycle analysis. So initially there is some data, and then synthetic data could be generated, which will then help to do different kinds of analytics. That's the first thing. The second most important thing is that you have to invest in research and development so that you can do different kinds of innovation, and you can test out what works and what doesn't work. That is very important, because all the organizations in our case studies that we have done actually invested in R&D, and if you are investing in R&D, you will also require more people to be involved. So invest in people as well. And to wrap up this, invest in getting environment management certification like ISO 14000, because it gives you the ability to understand where you are and what you need to do in order to be greener and in order to be more productive. So those are the learnings that I will say are important for SMEs at any stage. But as I go to the starting point, you have to make a start. And I think most SMEs are doing something which is green, which is lean, but maybe they are not aware of. And this was the case with some of the SMEs that we had interviewed, that they were not aware that they are actually making a difference and making a change.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Sum. I'll turn to you, Christian. So, Unternehmertum, you're accompanying some of those mid-sized companies, family businesses in their digital transformation journey. Innovation journey. Can you tell us a little bit more how this connects with future readiness and how this actually is quite a core driver of that future readiness building?
Yeah, so actually digital transformation is I think the key driver for being future ready. And as you just mentioned while the introduction, actually SMEs and mid-sized companies make up the majority of our economy. And when we reflect on this topic from a digital perspective, it should be our own interest to get this kind of community of 90% companies around the globe to be more digital. Why? Because it's only an economical aspect, it's also a society aspect they are also evolving in. When we talk about digital transformation, we see it as an overarching concept. So that means we are having kind of three views on that topic. So the first one is actually dealing with the digitalization of processes. So the application, how you do stuff. The second thing is then on a product and service level, so how to digitalize your products and services. And the third one is actually how to deal with new digital business models. And from our point of view, it's really essential for SMEs to have a, let's say, clear plan what the aim of your digital transformation is all about, whether it's focusing on one out of these three or on all of them, to have more clarity and then have a real driver to be future ready in this case. And I do believe being digital ready is the case to be future ready as an SME mid-sized company.
Great, thank you. And I'd like to follow up on this because you've been talking about sustainability, digital transformation. We've seen also in the report that, of course, these things go hand in hand. Do you have a concrete example you could share of a company that has successfully kind of gone through that twin transformation in a way?
Yeah, that's an interesting question, because the cases we see more and more is a combination of digital and sustainability. And we described within that report in our chapter one case from a company called Dorfner. So Dorfner is a typical SME company from its size and employees, coming from a mining industry, so really traditional business. So they were actually facing, or they're still facing, a lot of challenges like all of the SMEs around the globe. But they also understood that their focus and their ability to grow in their market is really limited. So based on that, they set themselves a plan, a digital strategy, to underpin what they want to achieve with digital transformation. And the first thing actually they wanted to achieve, and they also then realized, is that they actually digitize their application process, how they formulate new products, so how they combine materials within their products by using latest artificial intelligence technology. The interesting thing about this one is, and that's something we see is lacking within SMEs, the solution they were looking for was already out there in the market. So they are nowadays working together with a US startup who has that technology ready for them to actually transform their application. And based on that kind of new formation of products, they are now able to actually shape their paint products more sustainable, because they know what's in there. And that's why they get a digital process, data transparent for sustainability, but also the ability to drive their sustainable transformation with digital transformation.
Great, thank you for this. And I think it's very useful to see how these companies can make those shifts. I think we often think of them as followers or laggards somewhat. And here we have two concrete examples of what can happen when they focus on this in the right way and manage to shift. So I'll go back to you, Rashima. We've heard about this twin transformation from Sum and from Christian. We see that this is not an easy process, but that the benefit coming out of it is really big. What are some of the key levers and the key drivers for this type of transformation that came out from the work that has been done this year?
Yeah, thank you for the question. One unifying theme around sustainability and digital transformation is really leadership and the talent and the people behind this drive for transformation. So in particular, our report talks about talent fit, right? Smaller companies find it difficult to find the right talent. And by right talent, I don't mean the most overqualified people with the technical skill set, but I mean people who believe in the organizational mission, who are resourceful and resilient and will tide through tough times with smaller companies, because they're always in some sort of turbulence or they're facing some sort of shock, right? So one unifying theme really is to have that important leadership and having the right people behind the organizational vision. And in fact, I think smaller companies are in a better position to do this. This is because employees tend to be closer to leadership when it comes to decision making. There are also quicker communication channels so that when there's a change or a pivot, this can be communicated pretty clearly. And because of the people believing in the organizational mission, they are on board and motivated to enact that change. So in fact, smaller companies are at an even better position to start their sustainability and digital transformation journey.
Great, thank you, Rash. And maybe Sum, if we go back to you, I think we've heard a bit of how success looks like. Many, unfortunately, fail in that process, and there's also a lot to learn from these failures and these complications in a way. So could you tell us a little bit more about that, about those who you've observed that failed in this process, and what are some of the takeaways you observed from it?
So our research in Aston University and TBS Education that we did, one of the things is lack of self-motivation from the SMEs to do it. You have to be motivated to be able to achieve that. So lack of self-motivation and the will to do it because of not understanding what will happen in the future. So that's one thing. The second thing is that you have to get it in the process. You have to start somewhere, make a start, but focus on the strategy. You can have all the tools and you can spend a lot of money, but if you do not have a strategy, none of this will work. So what we say is that invest in people, have a strategy, take people with you, the employees, and then develop everything you want to do. and stick, and you have to know what is the purpose you are of doing whatever you want to do, and in this case, the sustainability, what you are trying to achieve. Because sustainability is not a method or a magic wand. You have to go through a stepwise process, a systematic strategy, and then everything should work, because that's what our case studies and our research has said. So hopefully, those are the reasons that it doesn't work.
Great. And maybe now a follow-up question, both for you, Christian, and then Rashma later after. What are some? We talked about a few things already in the last few minutes. What are some of the other things that should be top of mind of those companies when they're looking at building that longer-term future readiness? Maybe Christian, you could start.
Maybe two things adding on this. The first thing is actually understanding that digital transformation is actually a process and not only a project. So slice it down to small steps and iterate. Maybe that's also something the SME companies learn in our environment from our startups, because they also iterate and learn how to make small steps, get small feedbacks. And the second topic we also heard here in the Global Outlook at Weforum is actually the funding part, the financing part. And there are two sides in the story from my point of view. First thing is that actually SMEs are not used to having foreign investors in their company. But if you take a look onto the whole journey of digital transformation, it's worthwhile thinking about how to invest this transformation to see it as a real opportunity, because the money is out there and investors are looking for relevant cases to actually shape companies to be future ready. And the second thing is, and that's more from a financing perspective to the public, SMEs need more access to public fundings, so to specific funds from, whether it's from the European Commission or national governments, to really get access to that money to really shape their transformation. So those two things I would bear in mind if I would be an SME leader in the future.
So we started this conversation really focused on what the SMEs can do themselves. I think you're starting to branch out, and maybe Rashma, you could build on this of what's needed outside of the.
And as much as SMEs should be able to determine their future path, the support of the wider environment or the ecosystem is equally important. And in fact, 22% of the executives whom we surveyed cited that an unfavorable policy environment was a hindrance for growth for them. So it's very important to have this wider supporting ecosystem. Maybe I can give a few examples of how policymakers and other stakeholders can get involved. So for instance, in the report, we talked about the digitalization of trade, where essentially companies have a digital ID with their secured financial credentials. And you can use this not only for trade, but it could also facilitate bank loans, for instance. And if governments recognize this, this will really help empower SMEs for growth. The International Chamber of Commerce, ICC, they have guidelines on which types of documents that you can standardize to improve harmonization of standards, to improve interoperability across regions. And in sustainability, there needs to be more efforts, more resources invested into measuring how societal impact or values created across the whole value chain, right? There needs to be concrete frameworks, maybe even industry specific, and there needs to be investment. Currently, it's sustainability standards are being developed by NGOs or even private companies themselves, people who have a vested interest, but maybe it can go on a wider kind of policy level.
Great, thanks. Thank you, Rashma. Maybe before we wrap up, we've talked at the beginning about these companies being the backbone, 9 out of 10 companies out there. But we've seen that most of them are struggling and fighting for survival. So if we take those numbers, you have 70% of the global labor, the workforce, that is working for companies that are struggling and fighting for survival. And we're talking about what if they were future ready, and what is the opportunity behind this? Christian, could you say a little bit more about that? What's the opportunity behind this, the overall opportunity, before we wrap up?
So actually, it's quite hard to deal with different topics when you're in a firefighting mode. But as research shows, companies who are actually focusing their activities on innovation and technology during crisis or during firefight mode outperform their competitors by an average of 30%. So what it's all about now? It's all about putting unlocking the potential of digital transformation on your C-level agenda, and that means making clear decisions not to reduce innovation activities. I'll give you an example. You in a crisis, you tend to reduce costs, which is completely understandable from a short-term perspective. But on the other hand side, you can also decide to not reduce innovation and or R&D expenses, and that's a clear C-level decision. And or say it other way around, it's a reallocation of investing, and or it's a decision to invest into the future. And that's a C-level decision which can be made by SMEs because they have shorter way of decision makings and are not legacy like big corporate.
So you were saying it's kind of going against this cycle, right? And when
Correct.
everyone stops investing, you keep investing in innovation, and that might get you ahead actually, and really kind of
Correct.
the opportunity out of the crisis
Yes.
type of discussion. Great. So maybe just a quick thought from you, Rashima, wrapping up on what we've heard from Christian. If you have some closing words before we.
I think I don't have to repeat this too many times. There are so many global events like the energy crisis, hyperinflation, increasing demand from customers for sustainability, and all these shocks and turbulences are hitting SMEs and mid-sized companies hard. And of course, there is this extreme focus on survival, and understandably, it makes sense to be on survival mode and not want to make investments for things that will only pay off in the longer term, because you're thinking about your immediate and short-term survival. But however, we hope through this report, and these are research-backed evidence, we hope that through this session, through this report, we have shown how things like digital transformation, sustainability, they can go hand in hand. You can make a pivot. You can start small if you have the right people to move this transformation along. This is one way that companies can secure their long-term future readiness. And it's important to highlight here that these should be viewed as core fundamentals in the business as opposed to nice to have. So if you start with the vision, I'm just parroting Zoom here, if you start with the correct vision and stick with that strategy, how you get to that strategy can be flexible. That's where SMEs are really good. They're agile, they're adaptable. But if they're very clear on that strategy and are adaptable enough to shift according to the market environment, they can survive not only in the immediate term, but also they can ensure long-term prosperity.
Great, thank you very much. Thank you all of you for joining today here in the studio in Geneva and sharing your thoughts. I hope we have highlighted here in the last 30 minutes both the challenges and the problem that these companies face on a daily basis, but also especially the opportunity the opportunity behind it. And the idea with this report, you will see, is really to highlight those opportunity space and try to share some very concrete ideas and example of how this can be done and what can happen. So we have here also people who are kind of dedicating their work to help and support this type of companies, SMEs, mid-sized companies, in a way making them more future ready through innovation, through sustainability and others, and research. And I also want to highlight how the forum is and will be building on this work. So it's not just a report, we're also building on this. One thing Rashima mentioned before is that we have developed that self-assessment and benchmarking tool. It's publicly available. Any SME executive or staff could take this and try to understand where your company fits on that scale and how it compares to other companies of your size globally. We are also soon to open a new special series of sessions that really go deeper into these different elements we brushed upon today, and also open opportunities for SMEs, mid-sized company to really connect and open a space digitally where you can connect with your peer, exchange on best practices, and connect with experts. So this is something that's coming soon. Stay tuned. And finally, we're also growing our new champions community, this community of mid-sized companies that are dynamic, forward-looking, and purpose-driven. So if you're part of this and try to get on that journey and push it further, also you might be interested in this. So thanks again to all of the panelists here. Thank you all for tuning into this session. You'll have the link to the report in the next minute on the closing slide. Thank you very much, and bye-bye.